They didn't move when he passed the first time. 3 small shapes in the snow, hunched beside the blackened frame of a wagon. 2 still for sleeping, 2 quiet for calling out. No sound but the faint creak of leather and the slow breath of his mare beneath him. He kept riding. A mile. Maybe more. Until something unseen tugged at his reins like an old ache returning in the bone. Cormac Bell turned back. The snow deepened in patches, wind brushing it sideways. It caught in the trees like forgotten prayers and filled the hollow ribs of the wagon until they looked like bones in a shallow grave. Smoke still curled faintly from the axle, thin and gray, like it hadn't quite decided whether to let go. He dismounted slowly, boots pressing into the whiteness like he didn't want to startle it. The mare made no sound, just watched him as he approached the first figure. Small, still, knees pulled to the chest, hands tied at the wrist with braided twine. A burlap sack covered her face. Not loosely, not playfully. Pulled down tight, as if shame were meant to smother. Another form beside her. Smaller. Curled like a kitten in the cold. And a third. The smallest. Barely upright. Shivering so faintly he thought it was wind, until he heard the muffled sob. Cormac crouched. Not close. Not quick. His hands didn't go to the rope, or the sacks. He just knelt in front of the middle child, the one still trembling, and waited. For what? Maybe for something in him to break enough to start again. She whimpered, low and wet. The kind of sound only the unseen make, the ones expected not to exist once night comes. Then came the voice. Quiet. Older. Hoarse from cold or fear or silence. We'll be quiet, if you remove our sacks. Cormac swallowed. The wind pressed against his coat, but he didn't move. That voice wasn't begging. It wasn't afraid. It was tired. Steady. Like someone who had held on too long already. He reached for the knot. The rope burned stiff from frost. He worked it slow. The girl's face emerged first, older than the others, 5 maybe. Her cheeks were red and chapped, a cut at the corner of her lip. Her eyes were wide, brown, unreadable. Behind her, the 4-year-old stirred, and he moved to her sack too. No words. Just a small hand that reached forward and touched her sister's knee as if to ask, "Is it safe yet?" The third. The little one didn't lift her head. Cormac paused. Then, carefully, wordlessly, pulled the sack from her too. Blonde hair matted with soot and snow. Her face was too young to carry such stillness. Her breath came in faint puffs. Her hands were blue around the fingers. Cormac shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around all 3. Still they didn't speak. "Who tied you?" he asked. His voice cracked. Unused. No answer. What happened? The eldest girl blinked at him like he'd spoken in a foreign tongue. So he changed the question. "You hungry?" She nodded once. Not desperate. Just honest. He nodded back. The burned wagon behind them leaned to one side, wheels sunk in snow like old gravestones. Ash clung to the scorched bridle lace that hung from its frame. A string of fake pearls snapped in half glittered in the snow like scattered teeth. No other footprints. No horses. Just 3 girls with wedding things and no bride to wear them. He lifted them one at a time onto his mare, adjusting the saddle blanket so they wouldn't touch iron. The little one, the 3-year-old, Lark maybe, though she hadn't said, curled into his chest like it wasn't her first time hiding from the world inside a stranger's arms. They rode slow. The wind didn't howl. It whispered, soft and cold, tracing past regrets into the shoulders of the land. The cabin stood against the base of the hills, worn from storms, leaning like an old man who'd seen too much but kept standing out of stubbornness. He hadn't lit a fire that morning, hadn't planned on returning. He had no plans for anything anymore. But the girls were shivering now, even under the coat, and the eldest one had started biting the inside of her cheek like she was trying not to cry. It was June, he'd learn later. Her name was June. He opened the door and carried the youngest in first, setting her down beside the wood stove. Then the others. Then the fire. He worked fast. 1 log. Spark. Flame. Light. The room warmed slowly, like it was testing whether it still had the right. He found the bread. It was old, dry. He soaked it in milk. Set out 3 tin plates. The eldest made the others eat first. The smallest, Lark, just licked her lips and stared into the fire like it was the only thing left in the world that made sense. Cormac sat on the floor beside them, not close, not far. The girls didn't speak. But something settled in the silence between them. Not safety, not yet, but the shape of it. By nightfall, they had begun to uncurl. The middle one, he'd learn later her name was Bess, traced circles on the floor with a finger. June tucked the coat tighter around her sisters like it was her job to keep them whole. Lark let her head fall softly against his arm without asking. He didn't move. Outside, the moon hung low and pale. A coyote howled somewhere far off. The snow kept falling, not angry, not loud, just steady. A hush that made the world feel fragile. Later, as they slept, he stepped outside into the cold. The wind brushed his face and filled his ears like an old hymn. He walked to the barn, then halfway back, then paused. The ribbon lay in the snow, burnt on one end, soft on the other. Someone had tied it to the wagon rail before it burned. A mark of something, a bride, a dowry, a promise. He picked it up. It crumbled a little in his palm, but the middle held firm. He looked up at the sky, stars broken open behind the clouds, and felt something in his chest shift. Not melt. Not yet. Just move. Inside, June stirred. She sat up without speaking, eyes glinting in the half-light. Cormac stepped back inside and set the ribbon gently on the table, beside the empty tin cups. She looked at it, then at him. Then whispered, like a ghost remembering a name. You came late. The cabin held its breath for 3 days. No one spoke. Not the man with the tired eyes and slow hands. Not the eldest girl who kept her back to the door. Not the 2 younger ones who clung to each other like twin seeds caught in the same storm. Cormac rose before light each morning. Stirred the fire. Cooked oats even when they didn't eat them. Opened the windows to let in the sky and closed them when the wind bit too hard. He didn't ask for names. Didn't press for stories. The girls moved like shadows stitched into the wooden walls. June, the eldest, watched everything but reacted to nothing. Her face unreadable. Her eyes older than they had any right to be. Bess slept in short, shivering fits, waking often to cry without sound, then falling against her sister like a leaf returning to the same branch. Lark, the youngest, toddled behind them in wool socks 3 sizes too large. She didn't speak. Not a whisper. But when she found a wooden spoon on the floor, she carried it like a doll and pressed it to her cheek. Cormac let them have the bed. He slept by the hearth on a straw tick that once held his wife's shape. He didn't look at the empty space beside him. Not once. On the second night, the girls watched him pour beans into a pot, stir slowly, then set the tin bowl in front of the hearth. He didn't motion for them to eat. Just returned to the shadows and waited. They didn't touch the food. Until June stepped forward, took 1 bite, then nudged Bess with her elbow. That was the first movement of trust. The second came at dawn, when Lark climbed into his lap as he was pulling on his boots and fell asleep against his coat. He sat there, motionless, watching snow begin to gather on the windowsill like dust from heaven. The third came not from them, but from the town. On the 4th day, Ma Rowena came. Her knock was sharp as frostbite. She didn't wait to be invited in. She'd run the orphanage back when it had walls and no heart. A woman with a face carved like a spoon, and a voice that had split more ears than wood. Cormac Bell, she said, stepping inside. I hear you've collected children. I didn't collect them, he said, rising. No. She looked at the girls, then at the ribbon still sitting on the table, then back at him. They drop from the sky now, do they? The girls shrank behind him. Even June. Rowena clicked her tongue. You planning to keep them, then? I didn't say that either. You didn't need to. She turned to go, but paused by the stove, staring into the coals like they owed her something. Her voice softened, not warm, just less brittle. They look clean. That counts for something. She left without closing the door. Bess moved first, pushing it shut with her shoulder. Then turned, looked up at Cormac, and said her first word since arriving. Cold. Just that. A single syllable that cracked the ice around the room. He brought her socks. Found his wife's old shawl in a chest beneath the bed. Dusted it off and draped it over her shoulders like a coronation robe. Bess smiled then. Just barely. But he saw it. That night, June traced lines in the ash on the hearthstone. Circles and crosses, stars and dashes. When she caught Cormac watching, she said quietly, "I'm drawing the wagon." He didn't ask what happened to it, or what was supposed to happen inside it. But her hand began to shake. "I thought the fire would wake someone," she whispered. "Sometimes it doesn't," he said. She stared at him. "Why not?" "Because some people don't want to see what they'd have to stop." Her fingers stilled. The ash darkened beneath her nails. Lark crawled into his lap again. This time, she brought the spoon and handed it to him, waiting. He pretended to feed her invisible broth. She giggled into his shirt. By the 6th day, a kind of rhythm had returned. Bess helped sort lentils into old jars. June swept the floor with quiet pride, avoiding the corner where the ribbon lay folded. Lark carried a piece of coal in her pocket and traced windows onto the cabin walls. Cormac added wood to the stove without being asked. Replaced the cracked handle on the chamber pot. Sharpened the kitchen knife until it could peel a potato in one long curl. Still, he said little. The words weren't ready, but his hands spoke. And the girls, in their own way, began to answer. On the 7th morning, the knock came again. Only it wasn't Rowena. It was Sheriff Malden. Young, sharp-jawed, and always looking like he'd rather be seen than be useful. His coat was too clean. His belt too shiny. He didn't wait for an invitation either. "Well," he said, stepping inside, "this is something." Cormac stood still. The girls disappeared behind the bed. "I heard you had visitors," the sheriff continued. "I'm guessing they didn't walk here alone." "They were left in the snow." Malden's brows rose. "And you just brought them in?" "They were freezing." "Sure. But you know how this looks, don't you?" "I know what it was." Malden leaned back, eyes flicking over the cabin. "No family, no claim, no last name. They have names." "Do they?" He smirked. "You get those out of 'em yet? Or just making it up as you go?" Cormac stepped forward, jaw set. "You got a reason to be here?" Town's worried. A man loses his wife, disappears a year, comes back with 3 girls and no answers. "I didn't go looking for them." Malden nodded slowly. "Well, I'll give you a week. Let the court figure what to do." Then, turning to leave, he added, "Might want to teach the little ones not to talk to strangers. Some folks don't ask before taking." He left without looking back. That night, Cormac sat by the fire, sanding a broken drawer from the cabinet. June stood beside him, arms crossed. "Was he the one who tied us?" she asked. Cormac looked up. "No. But he would have walked by." He didn't answer. Lark brought the spoon to him again. This time, she waited for a story. So he made one up. About a girl with a blue ribbon and a fox for a friend. About a man who didn't know how to speak, but could hear things no one else could. Bess sat at his feet, head against his leg, already half asleep. June didn't sit. She stayed at the door, watching the dark like she expected it to walk in. When the fire died low, she finally whispered something, so quiet he wasn't sure he'd heard it right. "Is it true girls can't own land?" Cormac blinked. "What?" She repeated it. "Is it true, girls can't own land? That's why they wanted us gone." He didn't answer. Because the answer wasn't simple. Not in this county. Not with the kind of men who call burned wagons accidents and 3 tied children nobody's business. He reached for the ribbon on the table and ran a thumb across the charred edge. "No," he said softly. It's not true. But some men like pretending it is. June's eyes didn't blink. I remember one of their names now. Cormac looked at her. She didn't say it. Not yet. She just turned toward the window. And the snow had stopped. But in the distance, beyond the trees, the glow of another fire had begun to rise. Cormac didn't ask who lit the fire beyond the ridge. He watched the glow from his porch in silence, his cup gone cold in his hand. The stars above it seemed to flicker harder, like they too were warning something was coming. Inside, the cabin was soft with hush. June braided Bess's hair beside the hearth, careful and slow, as if the act itself was a spell to keep the walls standing. Lark lay across his lap, curled like a kitten with her thumb in her mouth and the same wooden spoon still clutched in her hand. He hadn't asked about the ribbon again. It still lay folded on the table, between the tin lamp and the knife he never reached for any more. The girls didn't ask why the sheriff had come, or why Ma Rowena now dropped off a bag of potatoes each morning without a word, or why strangers had started riding through town asking about girls with sacks on their heads and rope around their wrists. The girls didn't ask. But their silence had started to stretch too long. That night, he lit a second fire out back, closer to the woodpile, like a beacon. Not to draw anyone in, but to remind whatever passed through these parts that someone was still here. Still watching. June came out quietly and sat beside it without asking. She didn't look at him. She just stared into the flames. "When I was 4, she said, "we had a piano." He turned slightly, surprised at the sound of her voice, not because it was soft, but because it had weight. Like a door opening that had long been nailed shut. It didn't work right. The keys stuck. One time Bess got her finger caught and screamed until Mama dropped a kettle trying to reach her. The water burned her arm. Cormac said nothing. Let the memory find its own pace. After that, June went on. Mama stopped playing. She looked at him now. Really looked. "Do you think people can stop being themselves, if they stay afraid long enough?" He met her eyes. "No," he said. "But they forget who that self was." She nodded. "Then I don't remember mine." The wind shifted. The fire snapped. Inside, Bess stirred. Lark whimpered once in her sleep, then grew quiet again. June rubbed her palms together. Before the fire, one of the men said we'd be safer starting over. He said that land was wasted on girls. That no one would come looking. He had yellow teeth, like corn left too long on the stalk. Cormac didn't flinch, but he added a second log to the fire. "And the sheriff?" she asked. "I don't think he cares about anything past his boots." June's mouth twisted slightly. "He helped the man once. I saw him hand him a paper. Said it was just business." Cormac nodded once. Then she did something that stunned him more than anything else had in days. She leaned her head against his arm. Only for a second, but long enough. Inside, the girls began to stir again. Bess padded out with a blanket and curled beside June, pulling it up to her chin without looking at either of them. Lark followed, her little legs thumping on the porch. She handed Cormac a pine cone like it was a treasure, then sat in his lap as though no fire in the world could warm her better than he could. That was the moment he decided to take them into town. Not to expose them, but to let them be seen. There's a difference. The next morning was pale and sharp. Clouds like old bruises hung low over the hills. He hitched the wagon Ma Rowena had helped fix last spring. It still leaned to one side, but it would hold them. The girls didn't ask where they were going. But Bess dressed herself. June packed 3 pieces of bread and Lark brought her spoon. Cormac let them sit up front, tucked in wool blankets. He drove slow, careful not to jar the wheels on the rocks, not because they were delicate, but because he had begun to understand what they had survived. They passed the church first. Old, whitewashed, chipped like a lie half-told. Folks stopped and stared. No one waved. They passed the general store next. Mrs. Thistle stepped out, wiping her hands on an apron too clean to trust. She didn't speak. But she didn't look away either. Inside the saloon, Men leaned against windows like shadows wanting something to blame. Cormac kept the reins loose. Didn't meet their eyes. He pulled the wagon to the schoolhouse. Empty now. Closed for repairs. But the old sign still hung above the porch like a question left unanswered. There, under the broken bell, he stood the girls in front of him. This, he said, was meant for them. He said it to no one. And to everyone. Bess held June's hand. Lark pressed her head into his coat again. A man spat in the snow behind them. Another muttered something. But no one stepped forward. And no one tried to take them. That evening, back at the cabin, something changed. The girls moved lighter. Bess sang to herself while stirring beans. June hummed and didn't seem to notice. Lark fell asleep on the floor beside Cormac's boots. He carved that night. An old piece of pine, smoothed with age. He made 3 small figures. 1 tall, 2 smaller. He didn't paint them. Didn't give them faces. Just shapes. When June saw them, she didn't speak. She just took one and tucked it beside her bed. Later, long after the fire had faded to coals, she woke him. Not with a scream, but with a single name. Chester, she whispered. Cormac opened his eyes. He was the man with yellow teeth. Chester Dunn. He was Mama's cousin. She said to never trust him. He sat up slowly. June stood there in her nightdress, hair braided tight, fists clenched. He said if we told, no one would believe us. He said girls lie. That people only believe papers and men with hats. Cormac looked at her, slow and steady. I believe you, he said. She looked away. Swallowed. There's a paper, she added. A deed. It has our names. Mama hid it. Under a rock near the well. His breath caught. And the land? He asked. June nodded. Ours. All 3 of us. That's why he burned the wagon. Outside, the wind picked up. Not hard. Just enough to remind the world that winter hadn't gone yet. Inside, the girls slept. But Cormac stood at the window, eyes on the ridge where firelight had once flickered. Not a single ember burned now. But he knew. By morning, someone would come looking for the land he had no intention of giving back. They came before dawn. 3 riders, black coats, no lanterns. The hooves didn't echo. They pressed against snow like wolves too careful to be heard. Cormac watched from the porch, rifle laid across his lap but untouched. Inside, the girls were still asleep. He didn't move until the riders stopped at the gate. The man in the middle wore a silver belt buckle that gleamed like a wound. Chester Dunn. His face was lean, creased, and smiling. Not a warm smile. A practiced one, like someone who sold things no decent man should buy. You got something that don't belong to you, Chester said, voice flat as gravel. I don't have much of anything, Cormac replied. Chester tilted his head. Don't lie, Belle. You've got 3 pieces of stolen property sleeping in your house. They've got land on their name. Land I intend to see signed over proper. They're children. They're signatures, Chester snapped. And that signature buys me 50 acres and the house their mama tried to hide behind. He dismounted. The other 2 stayed mounted. One chewed tobacco like a slow clock. The other had a scar from temple to jaw and fingers stained with ink. A notary, maybe. Or someone who knew how to forge one. Chester stepped toward the porch. Be smart now. Bring 'em out. Let 'em sign. It'll all be over quick. I'll even pay you for your trouble. Say, $10 a head. Cormac stood. He didn't touch the rifle. But the way he looked at Chester made the wind hesitate. You tie sacks on their heads? He asked. Leave them to freeze? Chester chuckled. I gave them a chance to disappear quiet. But they just kept breathing. The door creaked open behind Cormac. June stepped outside barefoot, eyes sharp, shoulders square. She held the ribbon in one hand. It trailed like smoke. Behind her came Bess, half hiding behind her sister. And then Lark, still holding the spoon. Chester blinked. "Well," he said, "there's my little heirs." "They're not signing," Cormac said. Chester's jaw twitched. "Then I'll take them." He moved. But June stepped between them and held out the ribbon like it meant more than paper ever could. "We remember," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "We remember what you did to Mama. We remember what you said. And we remember where the deed is." Chester froze. Cormac reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but a folded square of weather-worn paper. He held it up. "The original deed," he said, "signed by their mother, witnessed by 2 names still living, buried beneath the well, just like June said, still dry, still legal." Chester's face paled. The notary dismounted slowly. "You bring it to court," the man muttered. "But this here ain't court." "No," Cormac said, "but the town's coming." He nodded behind them. From the tree line, shadows began to gather. Ma Rowena on a wagon bench, Dr. Ames behind her, 3 ranchers with hands on their belts, and even Mrs. Thistle, clutching a lantern like it was the last light left in the world. "I sent word," Cormac said. "Figured you'd come early." Chester stepped back. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. "You already lost," Cormac said, voice low. "You lost when you left them breathing." Chester looked at the girls, at June's steady stare, Bess's quiet defiance, Lark's spoon lifted like a charm. And for the first time, he looked afraid. He turned, spat in the snow. "Burn with the rest," he muttered and mounted up. The riders turned. And this time, when they disappeared into the trees, they left no smoke behind them. The sun broke late that morning, gold edging frost. Rowena stayed long enough to ladle stew into the girls' bowls and scold them for not wearing shoes. Ames helped hammer in the broken porch rail. No one said the word orphan. No one said property. No one asked again if Cormac meant to keep them. By evening, the girls danced in the cabin barefoot, chasing each other with spoons and laughter. June didn't smile much, but her shoulders had softened. Bess sang under her breath. And Lark climbed into Cormac's arms and stayed there until sleep found her. He stood with her by the window. The ribbon hung on the sill now. No longer burnt, just worn. Below it, the deed lay folded beside 3 pine dolls and a bowl of river stones. Cormac touched each of their heads as he passed them, fingers grazing hair like prayer beads. They were not his. But they were not no one's. And maybe that was the most a man could be, to hold what others had tried to break, and not fix it, not own it. Just keep it safe long enough for it to grow again. He opened the door one last time that night, stepping into the cold. The wind carried nothing now. No ash. No smoke. Only the scent of pine and the faintest sound of laughter from inside. He stood there a long time, head bowed, hands at his sides. He'd once buried his wife beneath that tree line. Said goodbye to everything soft in him. But now, there was a spoon in his shirt pocket, a ribbon on his table, and the quiet breathing of 3 girls behind him. The wind moved again, gentle this time. It didn't sound like sorrow anymore. It sounded like hope. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.